a sort of update on how far we've got and where things are going. And it's an opportunity then to think about the progress that's been made, really about implementing the vision that was set out in the Commission on RE's final report that I know many of you are familiar with, that came out in 2018. So the RE Council responded to the Commission report by setting up a series of projects. I mean, the core report, as it's known, has a number of recommendations, but these responses were really focusing on clarifying and exemplifying a worldviews approach in our subject. And the first response was an academic review into the term worldview from among a range of academic disciplines. How is it used in these different disciplines? A second response was from a series of academic conferences that again focused on the nature of worldviews, examining whether this shift to a worldviews approach is merited, is it worthwhile, and also what its likely implications are for RE. And those ideas were presented in a series of, in these discussion papers that you can see on the screen there. And all of these things are accessible from the RE Council website, and I've put the link in the chat as well. Now, the third response from the RE Council is the current project that we're talking about this afternoon. It's a 3-year project. It's supported with funding from Templeton World Charity Foundation. We're a little over halfway through at the moment. The first phase of the project was creating some guidance for curriculum developers on the worldviews approach, what it looks like, how it might be put into practice. And our draft version of what we hope will become a handbook was published in May last year, May 2022. And again, if you haven't seen that, then you can access it from the RE Council website as well, and the link is in the chat. So I just emphasize that this is an ongoing project. We haven't sorted everything out. There's a lot of thinking going on and still a lot more to do as well. Now, I think the vision of the Commission report, this call for a worldviews approach, does herald an immensely significant development for RE, but it is not a repudiation of past RE practice. So there's lots of continuity. So, for example, there's a worldviews approach has a real sensitivity to diversity among those with religious and non-religious worldviews, and noting the overlap between those two categories. I did a session earlier in the build-up towards Strictly about the religious, non-religious not being a binary. And so that kind of sensitivity it comes from perhaps the ethnographic approach of Bob Jackson and those at Warwick University. The worldviews approach has a real interest in asking questions about truth claims as well, and so building on the work of Andrew Wright, critical realist approach. There's a real interest in hermeneutics as well, and interpretation, the sort of approach that's modeled in Understanding Christianity, and the work of people like Bob Bowie and his colleagues. There's also worldviews approach has got a real, really centers on the pupil. It says the subject is for the pupil. It contributes to pupils' personal development, and the work of Mike Grimmett is really still influential in that regard. And there is also a concern with the current situation, with our current context, where we are as human beings in what is a challenging world, and the idea of preparing pupils for active participation in this world. So it's not just about getting pupils to understand the world better, but actually to help them to make a positive contribution to it. And the work of Pat Hannam, Kevin O'Grady have highlighted that and keep reminding us of that as well. So there's a lot of continuity, but we are advocating some changes, we think, something new. It's a sort of new engagement, perhaps. It's a re-engagement with RE's subject matter. It's a change to how familiar content is approached. And that's because the focus is on the role that worldviews play in people's lives. And that's huge because it is the way in which we all encounter the world. So the worldviews approach looks at worldviews as objects of study, worldviews as part of how we actually do the studying, and worldviews as part of the experience of those who are doing the studying as well. And so the draft resource contains lots of details about this, so I'm not going to go into that here. Instead, we're going to focus on the second phase of this 3-phase project. So this second phase involved appointing 3 framework development teams. So it was an open process, a number of people, a number of groups applied, and these 3 were selected. and their task is to respond to this draft guidance and to use it to develop a framework for RE for their specific contexts. So the purpose of each framework then is to take the worldview approach that's set out in the draft resource and then apply it to model how curriculum leaders in schools or in MATs or in SACRAs can develop a curriculum appropriate for their particular context. So the draft resource sets out key ideas about a worldviews approach and guidance on how to implement it. And the phase 2 of the project then is to examine and apply that guidance to what effectively it's road testing it for clarity, for effectiveness, and then modeling the process of translating the draft resource into concrete curriculum choices. So we're going to hear a little more about how these framework development teams are progressing during this session. We're going to hear from the 3 team leaders. First of all, I'm just going to ask the 3 of them if they would just introduce themselves and talk about briefly about the context in which their team is working, and also to highlight some of the specific challenges that they face in this context. So Jen, I wonder if you'd like to just start and say who you are.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jen Jenkins, and I am leading what I like to call the old school team. So I'm working with some local teachers, 10 fab teachers from primary and secondary. They are from church schools, non-church schools, community schools, and we're also benefiting from Tim Hutchins and Celine Benoit supporting us in our team as well. So amazingly not sick of me yet after working with me on my previous project. We are also looking at our agreed syllabus at the same time. So we're looking at sort of Coventry and Warwickshire as a local context. We're getting input from our SACRA, and we're sort of running these 2 things along at the same time. One of the most important things for our group is reconciliation. So we're working within the local flavour of Coventry Cathedral, the reconciliation theme that sort of emanates from there. So we're looking at how can we centralise that, but also make sure that it is suitable and appropriate outside of a Christian context. And we are looking at that in terms of substantive content, but also pedagogically. Challenges, well, diversity, we're an all-white women team. And that just ended up being who was available, which head teachers could support. So we've had to kind of enlist some further help, a second rung. So we've got some input on Dharmic traditions, and we've got some local faith school teachers from Sikh school, local Muslim school, who are ready to do some co-constructing and some trialing. So we've sort of tried to kind of throw the net a little wider. I think we're wrangling with the centrality of the reconciliation idea in terms of our discussions around what that means. We're having lots of discussions about in the main Christian, what does that mean? And we really want to make sure that whatever we're doing sort of takes account of non-religious and religious worldviews as well. And so we've got some really helpful critical friends who are posing some questions for me around that, which has been great. I think that kind of summarised who we are and what we're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen, that's great. Nikki, how about you?
Let me unmute myself. I'm going to share my screen, so I've got a little bit more guidance on what it is that I'm going to be saying. So I'm the trust lead for Inspiration Trust, and we're an academy chain based in Norfolk and North Suffolk. I'm going to say we're known for our curriculum work and knowledge-rich approach. I hope that's what we are known for. And if you go back into the legacy of Inspiration Trust, we've got real key influences. So Hirsch and that idea that there is knowledge is important and knowledge matters, and linking that with social justice. Within the RE team, I think Michael Young and David Lambert and their book, I'm Such a Geek, It's Always Next to Me, and that idea of future 3 education, so the importance of subject communities and disciplinary knowledge, and there's a nice link with Norfolk there as well, and the idea that knowledge isn't fixed, and what makes knowledge powerful is the ability to create new knowledge and to widen the canon. And I think that's what distinguishes Young from Hirsch for me, and why perhaps I'm more the Young camp than the Hirsch camp. And within RE, critical RE has been a huge influence on our work. And that idea that, yes, there is knowledge out there, but we view that knowledge through the filter of our own experiences. So those are the two big sort of academic influences on our work. We're also, or I'm keenly aware that although I work for an academy chain, it's very supportive of RE. I tweeted about my CEO recently. They're very keen on this project. We know from the report card into RE that's been shared by organisations like NATRE that there is an academy chain problem, and that 34% of academies report no timetabled RE. It's getting better, but it needs to get better faster. And so I almost see our team as like a bridging group where we're doing the kinds of things that academy chains do, and then bringing that together with a worldviews approach and high quality RE. We want to show how a centralised curriculum can make local links. Our geography and history in the east of England is really, really important to us. And so that's a big part of our approach, our context, geographical, historical matters. We've drawn from primary expertise that goes beyond our trust. So we're not just Inspiration Trust. I know John Semmons is on the call and he's part of our team. And it's very important that we are teachers empowering teachers to shape our subject of the future. And in particular, I want to pay homage to the expertise of primary teachers. And so our team is weighted with primary expertise, and that was a deliberate decision. Challenges. We've been having lots of conversations for a number of years about balancing Hirsch, Young, knowledge, the idea that there is knowledge out there with the worldviews approach and showing humility about that knowledge. And the critical RE approach has really helped us navigate that. I deal with inquiry questions every single day. Designing a worldviews inquiry question is really hard. We've had lots bounce back. We've rolled our eyes at Stephen and then had another go. It's much harder than we thought it was going to be. And then I am a challenge for my group because I need to be very aware of my worldview. So I could fill a curriculum with lefty feminists, be living my best life, but that wouldn't be a broad and balanced curriculum. So I am a challenge to my own team, and they have their work cut out. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Gillian, how about you?
Hi, everyone. Right, so Jen is doing a locally agreed syllabus. Her work's linked with that, and Nikki's is a multi-academy trust curriculum. And I envy them both horribly, because what they are able to do is to actually build something from scratch that progresses nicely. I've got the odd team, and I hope they don't mind me saying that. We are a group of teachers from all over the country. We have got a primary teaching assistant, primary teachers, secondary heads of department, urban, rural, single form entry, multiple form entry, tiny little schools with mixed classes. And I think the way we are pitching our framework is to show how one might take a worldviews approach with existing curriculum. So how might you take your existing curriculum and shift it with this worldviews lens and see the difference that that makes? So we are almost functioning as a bridging opportunity from the way in which we have been doing things for many years towards this new approach. That then means that the single biggest challenge that we have is to produce something that actually shows progress. Because I have got teachers producing early years units in Lincolnshire and lower key stage 2 units in East Anglia and secondary school units in central London. And, you know, everyone's all over the place. So it's very, very difficult for us to show something that is progressing consistently over time. I think we also, as a group, have similar concerns that Jen has about her group in terms of diversity. So we also have sought out sort of critical friends and people to speak into the worldviews that we do not ourselves experience, occupy, and just act as that mirror and reflection point for us. That's very important to us. But I think it's also fair to say that as a group, we have a wide variety of experience and expertise. And so there are some people who have been all in on this worldviews conversation for many, many years, and some for whom it is brand new. So it's a very exciting opportunity to be supporting each other, listening to each other, really properly hearing each other and recognizing the specific contextual challenges and opportunities we have.
Lovely, thanks, Gillian. So, I mean, I hope you can see that some of the reasons for having 3 framework teams is about just the challenge of trying to make a worldviews approach applicable in its wide variety of contexts, and also that each has its challenges as well. And so, what these framework teams then are doing is to try to demonstrate this application of a worldviews approach in their context. Now, central to the project is the draft statement of entitlement, which is at the heart of the worldviews approach. And so you find this in that draft resource that came out in May. And so that draft national statement of entitlement is the tool that the curriculum writers will use both to plan their curriculum and to think about pupil progress as well. And it's actually the depth of study of the statement of entitlement that's the focus, rather than the breadth of study of the extensive information that could be available to our subject. And curriculum content they'll be chosen because it exemplifies the statement of entitlement at a level appropriate for the pupils. And then questions about how much is taught about any given organized worldview, for example, is decided on the principle of collectively enough, as Ofsted has it in the research review, and some of the work of people like David Lewin and his team who are working on this idea of how you select content. So those decisions, but we're using the statement of entitlement as the ground of that, if you like. And then planning of learning tasks, the selection of resources will also be governed by fulfilling the requirements of the statement of entitlement. In the document, it's divided up into 3 sections. You can see by the colors, because there's actually, in a table, there's a limit how you can show things in a document, but it's not a list. I mean, that's despite, the labeling of this A to K. That's the ease of reference, really, but it's not to indicate a required or preferred order. And so we've also included a diagram as well to try to give it some sense of fluidity, at least to attempt that anyway. And it sets out the field of inquiry at the center and the ways of engaging with that field of inquiry in the goal circle. And then around the outside, the position of the pupils in that green circle as well. Now, it looks static, of course, but you might think about it as progressing from the center outwards, or centrifugally, from an item of religious or non-religious worldview content to the pupil's position. Or you might do the other way, so centripetally, starting with a pupil's position, exploring it through engagement with the content. I'm grateful to Kevin O'Grady for that image of the centrifugal, centripetal. Now, the resource itself attempts to show that it's not a static list by setting out a sort of narrative version of this. It says, look, we've got a realm that we're exploring, and that any exploration is going to be, at any sort of journey, you're going to need to think about the tools you need, and you're going to think about the route you're taking. So you're consciously deciding what you're doing, but all the time you're doing it from a position. So the pupil, the student, the teacher is always doing it from a particular position. So that's the sort of narrative impact of that statement of entitlement and of the approach as well. And so one of the roles of the statement of entitlement is as a guide for selecting content, which we know is a massive challenge for the Worldviews approach curriculum. But as another reminder that it's not just static. In the draft resource, we're also suggesting the metaphor of the mixing desk as well. So you can see the elements of the statement of entitlement are all here on the mixing desk. And in one sense, you could take any item of content and all the elements of that statement of entitlement could be present all the time. Of course, that's not practically possible. And so as the curriculum's developed, each unit or each phase might fade up certain strands, draw attention to those. Other elements might be present in the background, but those particular units are going to highlight these particular strands of the statement. So Jen's going to say a little bit more about that in a moment. And so now we're just going to hear about a little bit more detail from the team leaders to think about, firstly, how they've responded to that national draft, national revised statement of entitlement, and then hear about one or two key features of their frameworks, as they currently stand, and then think about how the framework is exemplified in the work they've been doing so far. So again, we're going to go through the 3 teams as we had just now. So Jen, I'll turn to you again first. How have you responded to the statement of entitlement?
Thank you. I'm just going to make sure my screen is being shared. Can you see that okay? Brilliant. Okay, so some of you know I'm also a writer as well as doing this lots of RE roles, and we have a phrase in that world of having a WIP, a work in progress. So just to remind you, this is a work in progress, and this will probably change and adapt quite a bit in the next few months. So how we have sort of approached this is we've come up with our 7 core concepts that we feel are relevant to all worldviews, whether they're religious or non-religious, and we've linked those to statements from the statement of entitlement. And what we're doing is we're sort of exploring and approaching those concepts through disciplines. So we're going through like a disciplinary approach as well as a worldviews approach. So you can see our 7 concepts there, and where we've made links, deliberate links with different statements from the statement of entitlement. And we found the mixing desk analogy really quite helpful. So what we've done is we've mapped each of our 7 concepts onto the mixing desk visual. So this assumes that all the elements are always in play, but some are more amplified than others, depending on which concept we're dealing with. So this one's changes. So you can see that when we're thinking about the concept of changes, we're thinking about A, quite a lot, the nature and formation of worldviews, and also C, in terms of context and how important they are. We've also nearly always got the G statement on engagement, which is the ways of knowing, right up, because we're making this disciplinary approach, but we try to indicate at the bottom which are the disciplines that we are working with. So with changes, we're really focusing on human and social sciences and history as disciplines, with some theology as well. And that got us thinking, you know, this idea of music and that sort of context, that what the statement of entitlement does is it kind of introduces the idea that there's this recognizable melody that will be playing all through the learning journey and the curriculum, but there'll be these changes in each part of the learning journey. So for instance, a bit like in a TV show, Game of Thrones, something like that, there's a recognizable motif. Sometimes you've got loud and it's drums, and sometimes it's really acoustic, and sometimes there's guitar riffing, but you recognize it. You've got there's different things coming into play. So every time one of our concepts is intersecting with a discipline, then we recognize that there is an opportunity for a question to be posed there, and that several times across a phase of education, there might be a question to be posed. So you get like a spiral curriculum developing. So our questions to ourselves were, what are the questions that we can pose, and what are the most relevant case studies as substantive content drawn from worldviews that might provide possible answers to those questions. So pupils considering what those answers might be, whilst also considering their own perspective and positionality. So as I said, we're the old school group. We've got a lot of support from SACRE in terms of what might those most relevant case studies be, and how can they support us with accessing those. Also recognizing that some schools might choose to use their own case studies, based on their own immediate context and the resources they are able to access themselves. Now, reconciliation is right at the centre of what we're trying to do. So substantive in terms of, we've got some planned units around Coventry Cathedral and the reconciliation story, but we've also got some around the Coventry Religious Square Mile, which is when immigrant populations arrived in the city and supported each other in setting up different places of worship and establishing communities. So very much reconciliation in action. But we're also thinking of this in terms of pedagogically. So that idea of pupils leaning in to worldviews other than their own to discover and encounter those, whilst also considering their own worldview. And one of the most internationally renowned reconcilers is John Paul Lederach. He's worked in places like Columbia, etc., written a lot of books. One of the ways he frames reconciliation is this idea of a journey. So we're wandering a road together. We don't know where exactly it's taking us. We're wandering through eyes, ears and minds that are open to a better understanding of of different worldviews and then waiting for the benefits of that journey. So the good ideas that come from sort of leaning in and understanding worldviews better and how to approach them and study them so that that better understanding can occur. So we really like this concept of journey, and I'm a literary nerd, so I got a bit of Tolkien in there, and the idea that little by little one is traveling far. So with that journey metaphor seeing increasingly workable, we've sort of adapted these words from the statement of entitlement, and we are using that sort of journey metaphor. So instead of content, engagement and position, we have gone for explore, root and perspective. So exploring substantive knowledge from examples from worldviews, root as in ways of knowing and the disciplinary approaches that we're taking, and then perspective, looking at personal knowledge that the pupils bring to their learning, understanding their own personal worldview and developing those important skills of positionality, reflexivity and reflectivity. I've got stuck. So as we think about curriculum as journey, then that automatically means our pupils become explorers. So we started thinking about how we could create these unit plans that would show that idea, where the pupil is going to move from the familiar and the known of their own worldview and perhaps organise worldviews that they've encountered previously, and into the unfamiliar and the unknown. And so we are conceiving of the unit plans like a map. So you start off with your inquiry question at the top. In that speech bubble, you've got your disciplinary doors that tell you that this part of the journey is going to use these different disciplines. We will break that down into sub-questions. So that map will be filled with sub-questions that will really help support pupils in addressing the inquiry question. And I really found Dawn Cox's session yesterday really helpful for further thinking around that. Then we've planned in these intentional worldview checkpoints before, during and at the end of the unit. And in that final box, pupils will be able to consider how they could answer the inquiry question and how they themselves would answer it. So there's that opportunity for assessment. And then that joins on to the next part of the unit plan. So there will also be a second page because we know that's not going to be supportive enough for all teachers. So we'll have a second page where we've got some details of recommended worldview case studies that we will try to draw from our local context, approaches you might take, and resources for each of those sub-questions. And here what we're ending up with is we want to sort of look at our local examples and our case studies. We want to think about how we're moving pupils in their understanding from the particular and into the general. And I know Jill will talk a bit more about this with her framework. So we want them to understand those 7 core concepts over time so that they know more and remember more, but also can apply that to any worldviews that they might encounter. So this is, I've covered up all these questions because, you know, spoiler alerts, want to keep something back. We're just going to have a quick look at one of the questions that we've posed. How have religion and history entwined in this area? And in this, we're looking at the grand narratives concept. So we're using theology, philosophy, and human and social sciences. We've linked that to the draft statement of entitlement. We're going to be looking at mostly F and C, so influence and power and context, from the draft statement of entitlement. And then we're looking at sort of some of examples from our local context. So we've got Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries and the impact that had locally, the gunpowder plotters. There's lots of connections with Warwickshire, William Shakespeare's worldview and how that can be seen through his plays. We're also moving more into modern history, so the arrival of local places of worship and the development of communal worldviews within those specific places of worship. And then from there, sort of, we'll be jumping into the current world through those sub-questions. For instance, how are conflicts within organised worldviews expressed and responded to today? Do hierarchies still exist in worldviews today? How are these communal worldviews being expressed today through the roles of places of worship in local communities? So hopefully this is going to provide a really helpful and supportive structure for schools that might be new to the worldviews approach. And we've really used our local context to try to sort of put that across. So this is where we're at so far. I think that's mostly what I wanted to say, Stephen. So I'll stop sharing now. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks, Jen. Okay, Nikki, how about you and Inspiration Trust and Norfolk? You need to unmute.
Let me unmute. There you go. I'm still doing it. How have we used the National Statement of Entitlement? Well, at the beginning of our journey, when we met, so as well as some teachers of Inspiration, we had Matthew Lane and we had John Semmons, who's on the call. We perhaps got a little bit ahead of ourselves because we were so excited, and we went wrong because we lost sight of the National Statement of Entitlement and kind of did what we wanted to do. And so it is our anchor that makes sure that we kind of live up to the vision of the core report, and that we're getting that balance of organised and individual and institutional, questions of meaning and purpose and influence and power. So the National Statement of Entitlement is very much our guidebook, and when we lose sight of it, that's when we have gone wrong, and believe me, we have. We find really useful the explorer imagery that Stephen showed previously when he was talking, and that's been very influential in how we're interpreting the Worldviews approach. Influenced by the Norfolk Agreed syllabus, the disciplinary element we feel really comfortable with, that idea of selecting the right tools for the journey. But it's also helped us understand what we mean by personal knowledge. Now, I'm going to talk about climbing mountains. It's not going to surprise you, I don't climb mountains in my life at all. But if I were to climb Snowdonia and I went back and did it again, that would be very unlikely. My previous journey would shape my next journey. I would have memories of what I saw, where the difficulties were, how I felt. There might be a particular view that I want to look at again. And I like the idea of understanding how your experiences, and those experiences can include in the classroom, it's not just what you encounter at home or in your community, kind of shape how you view the knowledge that we're presenting. And there's our link there again with that powerful knowledge and critical RE approach. That's been very, very influential on our work. Then some key features, and a lot of this I spoke about this morning in my session on disciplinary diversity, but we want to appeal to those academy chains who perhaps don't quite see how academic RE can be and don't see the academic perhaps in the worldview. So diverse scholarship, both disciplinary diversity, but also the voices that we choose to amplify, and taking seriously that when you put a spotlight on one voice, you are putting another voice into the shade. So those voices need to be selected carefully, bearing in mind what I've said about my own worldview. Because we are in the academy chain world and we're thinking about direct instruction, cognitive load, and we want to use that language because we're bringing together RE worldviews and the academy chain world. So considering cognitive load and sequencing, a lot of thought is going into the order that we have things in. And something I've learned from my own work is where I've gone wrong, it's when I've tried to do new and hard at the same time, and that doesn't work, and you lose teachers and you lose students. So revisiting stories or case studies and going back in with a different lens. So for example, we can keep revisiting the story of the Good Samaritan or the story of Rama and Sita, and then they're not having to relearn the story, and they can do something hard and exciting and use a different disciplinary or worldview lens to do that. Our local context is really, really important. And I want to kind of showcase how a centralised curriculum can work, maybe in our context where we've got a geographical academy chain. And so we can reflect our community in our curriculum. I'm very inspired. I know he's on the call by Adam Robertson, who either last year or the year before said diversity can be on your doorstep. And I think that's really important. So taking pride in your local community, but finding difference in your local community as well. And, you know, a centralised curriculum doesn't have to mean that on the 5th of February at 1:28, everybody's on the same page of the same booklet talking about the same thing. Centralised curriculums empower teachers where they feel free and support them where they need it. And so pulling in, you know, hyper local examples. I'm always running around my local village videoing things to put into lessons. So I have a really, really local focus. But there are academy chains that work across country. So they might be interested, they might look at our East of England examples and directly want to use them, or they might think to themselves, how could we do this? Who are the people that we're going to choose? And it might be different according to where that academy chain is up and down the country. So these are some people. I'm not promising you're going to meet all of them, but these are some sort of influences of voices that you might meet. And again, lots of local. So we've got, of course, Julian of Norwich. We've got Elizabeth Fry. We've got Philip Pullman. Also places like Walsingham. I'm also really interested in, they're a rebellious lot, you lot in the East of England, I'm learning this, but sort of this tension that we find in Norwich, which is allegedly has a church for every day of the week and a pub for every day. And yet in the census before last, Norwich was labelled the most godless city. We've been knocked off the top spot by Brighton. I think that's a really interesting thing to explore, that we've got all these powerful voices and all these churches, and yet we've got a lot of nuns, N-O-N-E-S. I'm sure we have nuns too. But also the Julep Singh family. I'm really proud that in our trust, one of our schools is studying GCSE Sikhism, reflecting their local community. In the centre of Norwich, we've got the Ishan Mosque, which is an Islamic community that has got its roots where they're all converts that have come from London. Again, a really exciting case study that we could use. And modelling, this is how we do it here. Think about how you could do it in your place. And TAVES is a big influence on our curriculum. So when we got a little bit lost at the beginning, we were struggling with coming up with questions that worked for religious and non-religious worldviews and giving equal regard to the non-religious. And TAVES comes up with this series of universal questions that people ask. And so we're giving our children a chance to explore worldviews by using these questions. If you talk to John Semmons, he will give you the proper academic words like ontology and axiology. I'm not John Semmons, so I'm going to say them like this. So what is real? What can I know? What's the situation in which I find myself? Where did everything come from? How did we get here? What is the good for which we should strive? And what do we need to do to reach our goals? And so our framework is building out from those questions. And again, they root really nicely in the National Statement of Entitlement, and they give equal regard to non-religious worldviews and religious worldviews and everything in between as well. I'm really nervously sharing some questions because I have, these are not fixed in stone. And we're struggling with them. I want to be really honest about this. This is hard stuff that we're doing, but we've got some examples here, and hopefully you can see that, for example, that's a John Semmons one. That how do I know that I'm not dreaming at early years? That's a question about reality. How are people the same and different? That's a situation kind of question. We've got our local link there, Edith Cavell. What inspired Edith Cavell's worldview? What does goodness mean to her? I really like the idea of going back at key stage 2, perhaps, and looking at the story of the Good Samaritan through the lens of the people in Samaria today. I think that's really exciting. It means we can revisit a story and do something a bit more interesting, a little bit harder with it, maybe. Julia Norwich has to be there. So how does she show that goodness is about love? Another path question there. I really like this questioning of goals. So should we have goals? Does that make a difference? And should our goals be worldly or something different? Perhaps some Karl Marx in there as well. I really do want to stress these are not written in stone. Don't come at me if they're not there at the end. This is very much a work in progress. I've done a spoiler there that I shouldn't have done. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Nikki. Gillian, how about you?
Right. Okay, well, I'm going to just emphasize again that our context here is very different, because we are not building a curriculum or a syllabus from scratch in a way that progresses from early years up to Key Stage 3. So our starting point actually was lots and lots of research, lots of reading, lots of conversation, but crucially, lots of listening. So we have obviously engaged with all of the materials that Stephen shared right at the very beginning of this session, but we've been looking in particular at writing by people like Michael Young, because that's pertinent to the broader educational conversation right now in this country. Basil Bernstein, Kevin O'Grady's recently published book was hugely timely. Thank you, Kevin, for publishing that right when we were getting going. That was very helpful. Looking at Ruth Flanagan's work, Lois Lee, and we have very deliberately ensured that we are reading and engaging with both proponents and critics of this approach, because we need to be thinking about the ways in which it can help things move forwards, but also some of the potential criticisms and challenges associated with that. We found it quite useful, this is something we got from Kevin's book, to look at the signposts materials produced by the Council of Europe about 10 years ago. We played around with that a little bit, and part of our reasoning here was that we didn't want to create something that was only relevant to an English context. You know, we're mindful of the big changes that have happened in Wales recently, but we're also aware of the conversations that are happening internationally and the way in which they can be quite different in tone to the conversations that are happening in England. So we wanted to set our thinking in that much broader context. And it's been a hugely powerful part of the process to have two of our team members able to engage in a Farmington research program as part of this. So that has been incredibly helpful, and we're very grateful for that opportunity. The things that our Farmington teacher researchers have really been leaning into are questions around whether there is such a thing as I might call it foundational or functional substantive knowledge. Are there just some things that every child needs to know in RE? Do we maybe need to reframe that as whether there are some sorts of foundational or functional questions that we should be asking about whatever it is we're learning about in the classroom? Very, very helpful to have a primary colleague involved in the Farmington on that one, because it reins in us secondary bods a little bit in very helpful sorts of ways. Our other Farmington is looking in particular at what knowledge progression might look like in a worldviews approach, and whether that is similar to or different from the ways in which we talk about knowledge progression right now across the curriculum. So where are we at? Right, well, I'm going to remind you, we are trying to produce something that is more of a bridging resource, if you like, for those teachers in a classroom who have an existing curriculum who would like to make it more of a worldviews approach. So what we are seeking to do is to provide something that would help someone convert what they've already got into a worldviews approach, rather than necessarily building something brand new from scratch. Like my lovely fellow team leaders here, we have also started with the National Statement of Entitlement questions in order to devise a series of what we are calling framework questions that you would apply to your existing curriculum. We are not at this point designating specific substantive or disciplinary knowledge, because we can't, because we have teachers from all over the country working with different locally agreed syllabuses, different curricula, different multi-academy trust expectations. We are not in a position to specify this is the knowledge you will get, this is the disciplinary lens you will look through. We are also not assuming a particular model of knowledge progression, because that is something we are engaging in research about. And we are also not at this point in time suggesting any specific pedagogical approaches. And I mean, let's ring that work in progress bell again. You know, we are relatively early in the process of working with this. So I want to just give you an example of one of the what we're calling framework questions that we have developed with. And this is not a final product. This is a first draft job. We went through a process of using the research, the reading, the conversations that we've been engaging with, linked to the National Statement of Entitlement, to try and devise some questions that could be used by a teacher or by a department, by a subject leader, to review what they've already got, to try to identify potential changes, potential gaps, potential ways of developing the curriculum in order to make it more into a worldviews approach. And where we are at right now is just beginning to use these framework questions to apply to planning that teachers are using to teach in spring term 2. So end of autumn term, we had drafted our first series of questions. You can see this one here relates to the engagement element of the National Statement of Entitlement. We have one for the content element, we have one for the position element, and we have one other that I'm not going to talk about now because it's very, very early days, but we'll see whether that one works or not. And we are now applying this to units that are being taught early years, Key Stage 1, lower Key Stage 2, upper Key Stage 2, and Key Stage 3 in spring term 2. So I just want to give you one example of what that looked like in terms of the process working with the teacher who was planning for lower Key Stage 2. We took her existing unit, which was looking at Christian beliefs about God. We looked at the National Statement of Entitlement and looked at, where the existing planning did and did not draw on particular elements of that National Statement of Entitlement to identify potential gaps. We then used our framework questions in order to identify some opportunities to reshape this planning, but also some potential challenges, things that might need to be done a bit differently leading into this unit in order for it to work as a worldviews approach. And from that, we then drafted a sequence of learning. There are a couple of things that came out of that that I think were really, really useful. After we had applied our questions, we realized that instead of presenting things in general terms, all Christians believe, we were in fact going in at the other end of things. We were starting with the particular, and that was going to better help the children understand that there isn't a general all Christians and then anything that looks different from that is divergent from a norm, but that actually there are lots and lots of different Christians and connective tissue that helps identify them as having a Christian worldview. So there isn't that sort of value judgment as to whether their version of Christianity is the right one or the wrong one, if you like. So starting with the particular and moving from that into helping children identify the connective tissue between different people. We noticed that having gone through this process, applied our framework questions, the unit of study that came out the other end had a much sharper focus on critical engagement, and particularly was much more focused on understanding the significance of interpretation when dealing with texts or creeds or whatever it might be that pertain to Christian beliefs about God. And the one other thing we noticed became much sharper after we used our framework questions was that we had a much greater emphasis on the relationship between context and the lived reality of Christian worldviews. So this is a work in progress. It's continuing. We will be trialing the units that have been planned using our framework questions in spring term, and we have control groups to enable us to compare what it was like before and what it's like when it's gone through our process. We'll then review our framework questions in summer term so that we can have another go at this sort of second half of summer term into autumn term before the whole thing finishes off this time next year and we come back and tell you all about it again.
Thank you, Gillian. Thanks all of you. So I'd just like to express my thanks to the team leaders and their teams as well for the immense amount of work they're putting into these. As you can see, it's a complex issue, and several of them talked about the fact that this is an ongoing process, and it is We're on phase 2, we're halfway through it. We're continuing to work with Trevor Cooling, who's a project director. We've got an advisory group of expert teachers that we'll be appointing in the next few months to review what we've been doing. We really want to make this as effective as possible. And over the next year, the framework teams will be developing their units, and they'll be asking, getting pupils to try stuff out and get some pupil resources as well. And phase 3 will begin as that process goes on, which is about a revision of that draft guidance, bearing in mind all the experiences of the framework teams, but also thinking about some of the other things I've been writing. Someone's already mentioned Kevin O'Grady's book, but there are lots of other people who've been writing papers and responding to this idea, the question of original worldviews approach. And so that phase 3 will be about revising that draft resource, and then when it's published next May, May 2024, that is, it's to try to set out an example, original worldviews approach supported by these 3 sample frameworks. But of course, that also, to answer some of the questions that are in the chat already, this is not a quick thing. Even when that's produced, we're not saying that that's how it's going to be. It's all, it's all finished then. We just pick it up and run with it. It's still part of that ongoing conversation, partly because this is about a slow development, really. This is it hasn't reached everywhere yet. And also Vicky's question there about whether the statement of entitlement will be optional or essential. I mean, we think it's very valuable, and we hope that it will lead towards being guidance for SACRE. Certainly it's going to set an example. Now, we haven't got very much time left, so if you have got questions that you want to please put them in the chat so we can get them. I was going to ask the 3 team leaders just to say what they thought the value of a worldviews approach was, but what I'm going to ask them to do is well, actually, what I'll do is I'll add their answers to the supplementary documents that will come out with this this presentation. And so, you'll get their answers there. So there have been just a couple of questions that have come through where Anne's asking whether the statement of entitlement will change as a result of all this work. I mean, it looks like so far, Anne, anyway, that if it's changing, there'll be tweaks to it. And there'll be something about how we present it, how we express it in a way that shows something about the process in it and its flexibility, rather than its list-like presentation at the moment. So at the moment, there haven't been massive challenges to it. There have been some suggestions about things we might do. So at the moment, it's not looking as if it will be hugely different, but we're still open to that possibility at the moment. So I don't know if there were any other. I don't know if you noticed any other questions that we should capture.
Fairly early on from John, that was really Andrew. Made his name up, there we go, was saying it's fascinating, but apart from it strictly in some NATRE meetings, I've never heard of worldviews on the ground in schools. Does it show the biggest issue is disseminating the concept to begin with?
Well, I think this is an ongoing conversation, isn't it? And I think that the involvement of the 3 teams with lots of teachers and people being interested in this, I think that we recognise this is a long process from the Commission report in 2018. These are still responses to it, and I suppose none of us particularly likes change, and so the idea that suddenly there's the answer, everyone's got to shift, I think is unrealistic. And so I think that it'll continue. I mean, one of the things that was helpful with the Ofsted Research Review is that you can see that some of the arguments in the Ofsted Research Review, they're sort of aligned with this thinking. And I think that's something that is really helpful, in that we're sort of exemplifying that the Ofsted Research Review kind of approach as well through this.
So, question, how aligned is the Norfolk syllabus to this approach? Well, Nikki is working in Norfolk, Do you want to quickly answer that, Nikki?
It's certainly influential, and we've got people who are involved in the Norfolk Agreed syllabus, and that disciplinary element is there, and the inquiry questions element is there. I do feel like I'm kind of standing on the shoulders of giants who've gone before me, and maybe taking it in a slightly new but not completely revolutionary direction.
Thank you. And there was a question which you sort of answered about, well, will everybody have to do this? Someone put it far better than that, but that's what they were basically saying. And the truth of the matter is, these teams are working amazingly hard to show how this works practically on the ground and changing things when they find things that don't work. But of course, the political work has to go hand in hand with this. And so, yes, you do hear Natre talk about this, because we work hand in hand with RE Today and with the REC and with lots of the other parts of the RE community to go and try and get people to listen to us as well in this area. Stephen, Jen, Gillian, Nikki, thank you. Nikki talked about standing on the shoulders of giants, but I think one man, three women, pretty giant, the four of you, and lots of people have been absolutely fascinated. I think you've demystified some things for some people, and I think you have also helped some people see the way that these things might go. So thank you very much. I think it's really positive that we finish our conference by looking forwards, just as we started with Mary Myatt taking us one step beyond. I feel I need this on for this moment, obviously, but I think what you've done in what has become a festival of RE, I'll just stick that out there, what has become a bit of a festival of RE this weekend, you have taken us forward at the very end. At the beginning, we looked and wondered what we could pull from the past that was still good and what was brilliant that was going forward. And in between, and indeed in the weekday sessions we've just had some amazing people. In a minute, Katie is going to say some thank yous, but it wouldn't be the end of a conference without me just reminding you a little housekeeping moments. I know it sounds like I keep saying the same things, but people come in at different times. So well done if you've heard me talk about the evaluations about 23 times now. But I mean, we're only 13 minutes from that evaluation email popping into your inbox at some point in the next few days. Please fill that in, and at the end of that you will get the URL and the code so you can listen to the recordings, available till December the 31st, for you to have CPD for the whole year and PowerPoints, but don't expect them to be there tonight because you'd just be disappointed. We have to have time to upload those recordings, and also for our lovely speakers to be able to send in their resources for us. So we hope to have that done in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much for being with us. I think it's been amazing, but I'm going to hand over to Katie to say a few last words. Katie, you are somewhere in this big room. Start speaking. Here she is, and someone will spotlight her who knows how to do that. Possibly Katie, actually.
That's right, yeah, I might have to spotlight myself.
Spotlight yourself, Katie.
I don't know if I can do that. Hang on. No, I can't because I'm not. Yeah.
Excellent.
I have to spotlight. I'll start, and you can spotlight me if you can. If you can, that'd be brilliant. Okay, thank you, Fiona. I'm sure that all of you who have joined us for Strictly RE 2023, whether that's live here in the room at the moment or maybe you're watching in a few weeks' time, would agree that this conference has been absolutely beyond amazing. And I think I said to Fiona earlier that I think I'm going to need about a week to process everything that I've heard over the last few days and in the weekday sessions. And then after that, I'm going to watch some more, and I'm going to need some more processing time to see what that will look like in my classroom. It would be absolutely wonderful to hear from each of you about what your little gems and your takeaways have been for your own classrooms. So I'd really like to encourage you that using the Strictly RE hashtag after we kind of leave this room would be brilliant. Just let us know what's been your takeaway, what you're going to be taking back into your classroom, what you're going to be mulling over the next few days using that hashtag Strictly RE. that would be brilliant. We've got quite a few thank yous to say to people who have made this Strictly RE conference possible. So I'm going to start on my list, and I've got notes so that I don't forget anybody, because there are so many people that make what you've seen this weekend and in the days leading up to this weekend possible. So thank you so much to our panel speakers, to our workshop leaders, to our weekday workshop leaders in the evening sessions, and our keynote speakers, and everyone who has shared their wisdom this weekend. We've got so much to take away, so much to think about, so many resources that we can be taking back into our classroom because of each and every one of them. So thank you. Thank you to our amazing office staff who have been working behind the scenes for weeks, not just this weekend, but have been sending things out to you, have been troubleshooting, have been handling your bookings, have been sorting out all sorts of things, and are just quietly tapping away in the background and answering all those live chat questions. Thank you. We couldn't do what we do without you. Thank you to you, our delegates, whether you're here now watching this live or whether you're watching a recording, your questions, your comments, your feedback, and for just being amazing, whether you're NATRE members or not, being a supportive person towards our RE community. We really value you. Thank you to our exhibitors. I'm sure that all of you as delegates have loved meeting them, networking with them and gaining knowledge and all those lovely free resources from them. Thank you for being there and for standing on those exhibition stands virtually. I know it's been a busy weekend for you. And a huge thank you must go to our amazing exec members. Many of them have been working on things prior to the conference, have been speaking, have been behind the scenes, handling social media, answering questions in DMs, or just putting out little reminders so that we all got to the right places at the right times, or troubleshooting the Zoom links. You are amazing, and it has been a real joy to be part of this executive so far. And finally, I have to say it, but these two words, thank you, don't really seem like enough for Fiona for what she's put into this conference. She's saying no, but she needs to listen to this because honestly, Strictly wouldn't be the same without her, and she works for hours just to make sure that everything runs smoothly, and her support, friendship, wisdom and encouragement have been just a godsend to so many people. So thank you, Fiona. Thank you for coming to Strictly 2023, and we look forward to seeing you in 2024. I'm going to hand back to Fiona now and let her have the last word.
My last word for you is go to your weekends and enjoy them. Thank you very much for giving up all this time for your pupils. But now go and don't do any RE. Top